So, Lisa, let's talk about anxiety and stress. I know that stress is something that everybody experiences one way, shape, and form. It's both physical and also mental. And it's usually a response to some external cause of some sort in life. I know that stress is something that you find in the brain. It's a challenge. It's something that happens at work. It happens at home. It happens in life. It's some traumatic event or just some event in general that's really there. But stress can actually, if you get overwhelmed by stress, you really should be talking to a doctor. But in many cases, a lot of people just have a small amount of stress that they're dealing with, or a normal amount of stress. And so the question becomes, what do they do about it? And I know usually coming along with stress is anxiety. So at least, Lisa, tell me a little bit about anxiety.
So anxiety it's basically your body's fight or flight system going off. It's saying that there's a stress going on right now, and I'm going to amp up my system and put myself on high alert. And it's a very uncomfortable feeling, and it's almost meant to be uncomfortable because, as it says here, it's meant for self-preservation in a way. And
Mhm.
so usually when we feel anxiety, it's because we need to do something and make something happen.
Sure.
But sometimes, with a lot of us, as you can see, there's millions of people who have an anxiety disorder, which basically means that your anxiety is firing off and there's not necessarily a good reason for it.
Mhm.
And so, you have to find a way to bring that anxiety down.
Sure. And what's fascinating is that there's an estimated 264 million people that have this disorder, which means you're not alone. But here in the United States, it's estimated that about 31% of the adults over their lifetime will have some sort of anxiety disorder. So if you have anxiety or stress, you're not different. You're not strange. This is a normal thing that happens, with our lives.
Yeah.
What I found interesting is looking into the research into anxiety and stress. University of Washington put out a great study, and it was done in 2017, which basically showed that if you look at THC, it appears it decreases the anxiety when you take low levels of THC. So if you take a little bit of THC, you reduce the amount of anxiety that you have, which is great. But if you take too much of it, you'll actually increase the amount of anxiety at higher doses. So there's a
Hmm.
bioptic, we'll talk about that in just a moment. You got to be just careful about how much you're taking. You don't want to take too much, but you got to take a little bit to get started. And that's what's important. What's also important is CBD appears to decrease anxiety almost in all doses that have been tested, which is really interesting. And more importantly, everybody has a different response to cannabis, just like they have a different response to caffeine or they have a different response to alcohol. Everybody has a different tolerance. So again, you need to go low and go slow and test that out and see actually what's there. Did you have a chance to have you had a chance to take this other study that we looked at, the one about a critical appraisal of anxiety? What I found interesting is in this particular case, these doctors came to the conclusion that cannabis therapy may be more suitable to treat people with anxiety and stress than what we're currently doing with the pharma drugs. I found that to be very fascinating. I don't know if you've
I,
had a chance to see that or not.
I know, I think that's wonderful. One thing that makes CBD a potentially more effective, treatment for anxiety is that there's less side effects that are, incompatible with everyone's day-to-day life. It's a
Mhm.
lot more tolerable, CBD can be, than some of these other pharma drugs that are on the market.
Yeah, yeah, which is really interesting. Now, what's there's a group called LeafWell, and LeafWell is a great group to work with. And what's interesting is they took a look at pointing out that the hormone cortisol is really what's bringing stress into our lives. But when the human body is healing, inflammation is part of that stress response. In other words, we need inflammation to be able to heal. In short term, that stress and inflammation is beneficial, but long term, it can actually break down the tissue and impair your immune system. And even more interesting, they found out that 75 to 90% of human diseases are related to the activity of the body's stress system. That I find to be very, very interesting. So, yeah.
Yeah, it turns out a lot of, ailments that are out there, a lot of them can be traced back to inflammation, too much inflammation and stress.
Mhm. Yeah. And they also pointed out there's really three ways to use cannabis to manage stress. One of them is being microdosing. Lisa, tell me a little bit about microdosing. A lot of people haven't heard about that.
So microdosing is when you use a very small amount of cannabis throughout the day at fairly regular intervals. And so instead of having, a fairly large dose or medium-sized dose of cannabis in the morning, like a couple of puffs off a vaporizer or something like that, you're going to have just a little bit throughout the day, every few hours or so. And so like every 2 or 3 hours, you may have a gummy that has 2.5 milligrams of THC in there. And that's just going to keep the cannabis in your system at a really low amount to help manage that stress and anxiety, but not overdo it so that you feel inebriated or cloudy. And so a lot of people like to microdose during the day, especially if they have things they need to get done, which most of us do.
Yeah, just use a little bit less of what you would normally take, but just spread it out over the day, maybe into 5 or 8 sessions that's out there. It's also, microdosing is great because in many cases, again, with anxiety and stress, that's not a condition that goes away easily. But when it does go away, you want to keep it away. And by letting the cannabis potentially lapse, in other words, you go past that point in which it's working, it'll come back. So this really gets it to go away and gets it to stay away. And I think microdosing is great for that. But terpenes play an important role. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so terpenes are the essential oils of cannabis that give it its distinctive smell and flavor, as well as a lot of the beneficial effects that cannabis provides. And there are certain terpenes out there that'll really energize you and rev you up. And there are some terpenes in cannabis that can really calm you down and relax you. Now, most of the time, people are going to want to gravitate towards those relaxing terpenes to help manage their stress and anxiety. But if you find that those more energizing ones help you out, that's totally fine as well. I know myself, I use cannabis for chronic anxiety, and I personally prefer sativas because I like that little bit of energy and mood boost that it gives me, because then I feel like I can sort of tackle the day a little bit better. And for some people, like I said, that more relaxing terpene might be more appropriate for them.
Right. And also, and I think terpenes are really important. We'll talk a little bit more about terpenes and which ones we recommend for anxiety and stress later on in the presentation. But really, terpenes bring out the medical value in medical cannabis. The other thing that's interesting is to figure out the right dosage. We'll talk about dosing a little later on in the presentation as well. But you notice in the little graph that's over here, you can see that as you start taking more cannabis, you'll find that it really helps you be able to address the particular situation that you're dealing with. But if you take too much of it, it leads back to bringing anxiety back. This has to do with that biopic effect. That's why we say go low and go slow, because as you take a little bit each day, you just increase the amount that you're taking. At one point, you're going to feel great, but then at some point, if you keep doing that, you're not going to feel as good, and that's where you start to head down and slide. And you can come back to that slide by doing 2 things. Number one, go back to the regime that you were using the day or 2 before. In other words, take less of it. And then number 2 is have some CBD oil around, because CBD counteracts the anxiety effect of THC. It'll bring you back to that balance point in the middle that's really there. We'll be talking a little bit more about that as we go along. But there's also, again, we talked about research earlier. It's also found out that the endocannabinoid system plays an important role in regulating anxiety, fear, and stress. Tell us a little bit about that, Lisa.
Yeah, so the endocannabinoid system, it makes sure that your body is in complete balance or homeostasis. And when the endocannabinoid system notices that something's out of whack or something's out of balance, it's going to be able to tell your body to perform these various functions in order to bring the balance back. And so one of those things that the endocannabinoid system can regulate is your anxiety and your stress level. And so if your fight or flight, like I said, is going off for no good reason, your endocannabinoid system can be like, hey, there's no danger here right now. This really shouldn't be going off. I'm going to block certain actions that your body is taking from happening in order to help reduce that anxiety, and maybe even throw in some happy hormones as a mood booster to go along with it.
Very, very interesting. They've also found, for example, when you talk about PTS, it's found that cannabis helps quite a bit with that, and also with chronic pain, which has been kind of fascinating. In fact, I heard that the VA has now been authorized to actually study cannabis and PTS with veterans, which I think is the first great move I've seen by the federal government to really look into this and really legitimize what a lot of veterans have known for a long time. I think we also mentioned terpenes, which we talked about earlier, but there's also another study that shows that the specific endocannabinoid, so when people say, well, how does this all work? There is an endocannabinoid called the 2-AG, and that's the one that activates the THC receptor. And that's what really makes all this happen and brings the really relief that you're looking for. So there's solid science behind this. This isn't something that just accidentally just happened. We talked earlier about the CBD and THC. Lisa, tell me a little bit about the high THC versus low THC, because this is very, very important when you're trying to manage anxiety and stress.
Yeah, well, one thing that I think is kind of interesting is that if you go back and you look at cannabis research, one of the first times that it got done firsthand, I would say, Raphael Mechoulam was in Israel, and he had 10 friends with him, and they served a infused cake. And of his 10 friends, 9 of them had a very pleasant experience, but one of them, their anxiety started to get really, really bad. And I think it's interesting because that 1 in 10 seems to be pretty standard. More studies have been done, and that 1 in 10 people, when they have that high THC product, their anxiety does increase and get worse. And so you do want to keep that in mind. THC very likely can help you, but you might be that 1 in 10 that really should be going towards those CBD products instead.
And I think it's important to point out that cannabis, like alcohol and like caffeine, is unique to each person. I mean, some people can have one drink and they're done for the night. Some people can drink the bottle and they're just getting started. It really has to do with your metabolism, your body, and how that all works. So to try to understand and identify your tolerance to THC, I think is really important. And this is what you're pointing out here. Most people had a normal tolerance to THC, but one person had a tolerance where they were very, very, it triggered something that brought on a very high level of anxiety. And it's something that you really need to, that's why when you're doing your dosing, you're going low and going slow, so you can find out what your tolerance is to THC, which could be different from your friends, your wife, your partner, that type of thing. Also, high doses of CBD appear to reduce a lot of anxiety. Is that correct?
Yes. And I feel like the thing with CBD is that, a lot of people get relief from it, but almost no one will have their anxiety get worse when they try it. And so it's a really safe option for people to try. The one thing I do see from people who are trying to use CBD as an anxiety reducer is a lot of the time they use too little. They'll try like 1 to 5 milligrams of CBD. And usually with CBD, you need a little bit more than that. And
Right.
so don't be afraid to try that 10 to 15 milligram range.
Right. The CBD is not going to get you high.
No.
And if anything, it's going to be helping you, a lot of the receptors in your body. So that's very important. So it's something important to take a look at there. Let me go through here. So why is cannabis such a big deal, and why does it work? I mean, a lot of people say I've got anxiety and stress. I see the research behind it, but what is it? How does it work for me? Well, interestingly enough, we all know about our nervous system. We've known about that for a long time. Our nervous system is what I call the cell phone system of the body. When something happens in one place, it transmits a signal to your brain, says, Houston, we have a problem. And again, that's done through the nervous system. And what's fascinating is for years, everybody knew we had a nervous system. We knew that if we hurt our finger, hurt our knee, hurt our foot, it would send a signal to our brain saying, Houston, we have a problem. What I found amazing was Western medicine really never studied what Houston did with that problem. That's what I found really interesting. And when we started funding research into medical cannabis, and again, the U.S. government was funding research, has been funding research into medical cannabis since 1964. When they started doing this, Raphael Mechoulam, who's the person that they funded in Israel, found and identified the endocannabinoid system. And that system is a system that works in parallel with our nervous system, and it regulates anxiety, memory, appetite, inflammation, our immune system. It's really an important part of our body. Lisa, that's something that's really key, isn't it?
Yeah, and it regulates even more than that. I read a study not too long ago that said the endocannabinoid system can even regulate the fertility
Oh, really?
of people. Yes.
Wow.
I won't get too far into it because I don't want to nerd out too hard, but yes, it controls a lot of the different systems of the body. And that's one reason why cannabis can be so effective for so many different things,
Yeah,
is because it's working with this system that does so much.
that's great. That's interesting. Well, one thing that we found about cannabis is it's really what I call a whole medicine cabinet. Medical cannabis is the key to unlocking that medicine cabinet. But what is the medicine cabinet? The medicine cabinet is 450 medical properties that they have found cannabis addresses. And it's interesting, if you look on the right, there's this is a graphic that came from a Normal study that just shows it's 77 pages long of just research that's been done into medical cannabis and how it affects different parts of your body and how in different disease states that it addresses. But there's also 120 cannabinoids that we're studying. There's 200 of them that we know about. There's 100 plus terpenes that we're studying. Although there's almost 150 of those that they've identified. We're trying to catch up with. I finding these and studying this. It's only the study of cannabis has really only taken off the last 5 years. But also cannabis is key because of the entourage effect. Lisa, what's the entourage effect?
So the entourage effect basically is saying that all of these different cannabinoids and terpenes, they all have a different role, but when they work together, they create a much stronger effect than they normally would if they were just working by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really love how you put it, where you say 1 + 1 = 3.
Mm-hmm.
And so THC and CBD and the terpenes, they're going to do something for you on their own. But when they're all working together, there's just something more powerful about that action on your body.
Right. And we'll show a little bit about that in just a little bit, but it's really key. They really, 1 and 1 is 3. That's the important thing to understand about this. Now, let's get but when we talk about the body itself, there's really 2 different kinds of cannabinoids that our body puts together. What we're trying to do with our body is stay in what we call homeostasis, and that's when your body's in balance. That's when you feel good. And as we mentioned earlier, endocannabinoids are produced by your body. So when Houston says we have a problem, your body produces the endocannabinoids, and it sends those to that part of the body that needs to be addressed. Now, as we get older, our endocannabinoid system doesn't produce as many endocannabinoids as it did before. I say that as a senior citizen. And I think the other thing that happens is that it does take a while for your body naturally to produce these. And if you have an immediate symptom like pain, you want it to act right away and not necessarily take 5 minutes or 10 minutes to work. So in your body's natural system to be able to manage itself, it uses endocannabinoids. But they found something interesting about phytocannabinoids. Tell us about that, Lisa. Those are the things in cannabis that mimic endocannabinoids, right?
Yeah, and so things like CBD and THC, they grow on a plant, but they work in our bodies the same way that these internal cannabinoids that our body is creating work.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though everyone has an endocannabinoid system that is functioning, there's something about when that ingestion of cannabis happens, it boosts the entire system.
Right.
It's like a multivitamin for your entire body.
That's really important because what happens is, I'll take myself as a senior citizen, I may not be producing as many endocannabinoids, or I may not be producing it as fast as I should, but by having the phytocannabinoids in my body then has resources to pull from to address any particular situation that it's trying to address. Like in my particular case, I have herniated discs in my neck, and it helps to reduce my neck pain, which I think is which for me is really critical. It's there. But really, the whole idea of the entourage effect, we're going to go back to this for a second, is really the combination of your cannabinoids, your terpenes, and your flavonoids working together. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and so there's just something about those terpenes that can unlock the full potential of the cannabinoids.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about the cannabinoids that when they're working together, they really help each other out. And so when there's a little bit of THC present in a product, CBD's anti-inflammatory properties become increased. When there is some CBD in a product, it makes that THC inebriation a little bit less. It makes you feel a little bit more clear-headed. And so they work together to create an overall more well-rounded and more effective experience.
Well, an example, for example, is where CBD will lessen the psychoactive effect of THC. So if
Mhm.
you're doing your dosing and you take just a little bit too much, we talked about that little curve. You start heading down the right side of that curve. You can take some CBD and it'll bring you back to where you were before. In fact, bring you back to that relief point. And that's where CBD and THC are working together. Also, it works very closely. The terpenes work very closely with your cannabinoids and your flavonoids to really bring out the medical effects in cannabis, which is really, really interesting. And that's where
Absolutely.
the medical benefits are really shown there. Um, let's talk a little bit about CBD and THC because THC and CBD both affect or both work with and has been known to work with what they call the CB1 and the CB2 receptors. They're very famous for that. CB1 is one handles and mediates the physical and psychoactive effects. This is where THC comes into play. THC
Mhm.
works very closely with the CB1 receptor, and CBD works very closely with the CB2 receptor. Although both of these, THC and CBD, work with both receptors, it's just which ones do they work best with. The CB2 receptors are really something that regulates the inflammation, the immune system, and really the peripheral parts of your body, your nervous system, and that type of thing. But over the last 5 years, we found that there's research that's been done that CBD does more than just affect the CB1 and CB2 receptors. Lisa, what about these other receptors that are being affected?
Oh, it can affect the receptors that help control your blood pressure, help control your body temperature, even help, your serotonin production. And so it actually works on many, many different levels of your body.
Mhm.
As I like to joke around, CBD is welcome wherever it goes. Everybody likes to use CBD
Mhm.
to help out the body system.
And what we found is that the medical science is finding out it's helping our whole body. In fact, it's almost the super vitamin that our body
Mhm.
needs, especially as we get older. That's there. So, so how does how does medical marijuana interact with other medications? I mean, can I take it with other medications? Do you have some thoughts on this, Lisa?
Yes, and that is ask your doctor. Because I am not a medical professional and I would not know where to begin when it comes to cannabis mixing with medications.
Hmm. Right. And it is important to address that. Although a lot of the research that's been done has shown that in many cases, it doesn't have a direct effect and it can be used effectively with other medications. I think with the exception of medications that have to do with the heart and the blood system. In that particular case, you really have to be very careful. And again, talk to your doctor, talk to your medical cannabis doctor, because they want to be able to work together, work with you to be able to get this right. Don't stay away from medical cannabis because you're using pharma drugs. In fact, if anything, it helps you take you off the pharma drugs. Just make sure that your doctor and your medical cannabis doctor both know, and they can work together to effectively help you be able to transition off a lot of those. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking to do. They're trying to just get off of the current drugs that they're on,
Mhm.
get onto something that's more natural and better for their body.
Absolutely.
So, what are examples of this? Tell me some examples of stress.
So stress is a lot of the times, it's something when an unexpected event happens that causes you, stress. So an example here is that Aaron didn't have enough money to pay his electric bill. And so, that not having the enough funds to pay it, that's a stressor. There's a lot of questions that come with that. There's a lot of uncertainty. But it's something that can be resolved in the very near future. Whereas anxiety is something that's going to linger a little bit longer.
Mhm.
Another example of something that's more stress
Mhm.
is if you have, a condition that you're dealing with and you have been dealing with it for a little while, that can cause, a burden on you. And that's something that I feel like is important to point out is
Mhm.
that other medical conditions, especially chronic ones, will cause stress and anxiety over time. And there's been many studies that show that people who do have these chronic conditions do suffer at higher rates from things such as anxiety.
Mhm. And also you find that stress can trigger migraines. Now it's not
Yeah,
the reason for migraines, but it can trigger that.
absolutely. Yeah, as it was stated earlier, stress and anxiety can be the root cause, and inflammation can be the root cause of, up to 75 to 90% of, issues in
Right.
people.
there. And anxiety is a point where you become just fearful. I'll take David at the bottom over here. He finds himself in crowds and it gives him a strong sense of dread. Some people just don't like to be in big crowds and they get that anxiety from doing that. That's the bad news. The even worse news is it's very hard to avoid crowds if you're going to the city or you're going to shows or concerts or doing different things. It's something that you really have to really get a handle on to get yourself into a situation where you're comfortable and that you feel safe. That's kind of interesting that's there.
Yeah, that exact situation has actually happened to me where I was on a little vacation. I was visiting Burlington, Vermont, which is a lovely little city if you ever have the chance to visit. And I was feeling really anxious, really unnerved, and I wasn't enjoying myself at all. I didn't want to leave the hotel room. And then I tried a 1-to-1 vaporizer, and I just felt that stress coming off my shoulder, and I just felt like me again. And I was able to go out into that city and enjoy my day.
And then also you have Carter up here. Carter fears going to the doctor. Boy, that's one a lot of people have.
Yeah.
But also it's one of those things that if you just let it take over, your brain can blow that out of proportion, causing high anxiety, and really it affects your struggle. It puts you into a situation where you're struggling with your day-to-day activities. So anxiety and stress are very real. These are prime examples of it. Let's talk about something that can help be able to address that. Terpenes. Lisa, what's a terpene?
So yeah, terpenes are those essential oils in cannabis that make it smell the way that it does. And not only that, but it is also what gives cannabis the different personalities that it has. And so some cannabis strains or cultivars will make you feel really energized, and some will make you ready to tackle the couch and just chill out for the rest of the evening. And it's those different terpene combinations that, provide those different effects. And so if you're looking to feel a very specific way, such as relaxed, if you're feeling anxious or stressed out, you're going to want to look or at least start off with specific terpenes. My favorite two are linalool and caryophyllene for anxiety. I find that those two just really help relax me, make me feel just more at ease. And also, I don't feel too inebriated a lot of the time with that terpene profile. I feel fairly clear. And so those are my two favorite. But I do just have to also say, as it mentioned on the previous slide, anxiety can also cause nausea. And for me, things that are high in limonene cut through that nausea really, really effectively. And so those are my three favorite that I go for consistently to help with my anxiety and subsequent nausea. But other people find that myrcene is really effective for them as well.
And myrcene is found in almost every kind of cannabis out there. It's a very popular, let's just say it's very popular with the cannabis plant.
Yeah, not difficult to find at all. So if that's what you're gravitating towards, you're going to have a lot of options to choose from.
And there are certain people that also take a look at pinene. That is very good for anxiety as well. I think the only thing you have to worry about with pinene is it has the ability to really improve your short-term memory. Now that's good news and bad news. If you have PTS, I don't recommend a high dose of pinene. I'd say stay away from pinene. It's something that's going to help trigger some memories that you may not want to have. And then I think the other one is I find interesting is we talked about inflammation and how that had to do with stress and it had to do with anxiety. Eucalyptol is really good for that. It really helps. That minty aroma that's there. So we talked about terpenes. So here's the cultivars. Here's the different terpenes for anxiety and stress that are really good. I know that one of the more popular ones are AC/DC. Tell us a little bit about these, Lisa.
Yeah, and so if you look here, it's not all about the CBD and the THC. We're looking at combinations of the terpene profiles and the cannabinoid profiles. And it's those things put together that's going to make a strain maybe good for you. And so in the case of the AC/DC, that one's CBD dominant, which means it has more CBD than THC inside of there. And if you're ever looking at something that has a ratio, like a 1-to-1, 2-to-1, or something like that, the CBD will always be listed first. It's alphabetical. So that's just a trick for you to remember ratios. And so this one, I think, is like, I want to say it's like a 2-to-1 AC/DC. where it has twice the amount of CBD as THC in there. That's going to be great for anti-anxiety and also really good for, staying clear-headed throughout the day.
And Canisu has also been very good as well because it's the balance between THC and CBD.
Right. So that would be listed as a 1-to-1 ratio.
Right.
Exactly.
I think it's important to point out something here. Look at the terpene profiles of all of these different strains.
Mm-hmm. Very
we
similar.
talk about cultivar is really being designed to address particular situations. These are, I think, what you mentioned earlier about what your combination is to be able to address stress and anxiety. It's interesting how they almost mimic each other as you go right down the line here.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some others also. I'm not. This is not the only group that's there. But there's some other strains, or actually cultivars, I should say. And again, interesting to look at the terpene profiles. Here's ones with limonene. You mentioned that earlier, Lisa.
Yep. I really enjoy a good sour diesel, especially when I'm feeling that nausea that comes from high anxiety for sure.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the OG Kushes are always very popular with a lot of people that are there. So here's an example of some of the strains that are there. Let's talk about where you get them. At Insa, you have all the different routes of administration. You have flower, you have vaporizers, edibles, concentrates, tinctures, topicals. Why don't you tell us a little bit about them, because you have a very broad product line. What I love is all the white packaging. Thank you, state of Florida, for taking all the fun out of packaging a product, right?
Yeah, well, if you want to see how these products were originally packaged in a little bit more colorful look, you can always go to our website, insa.com, to check out some of the photos of our other products. But yes,
check them out. The ones from Massachusetts, go to the state of Massachusetts. You have
yes,
great
exactly, or Pennsylvania, yes.
Right.
And so routes of administration, we mentioned earlier that the way you use cannabis is going to change the way that you experience it. And so something like a flower or a pre-roll, those are an inhalation method. Those are going to make you feel the effects almost instantly. And so if you're feeling nauseated, you're not going to wait around for an edible to kick in or even want to eat the edible in the first place.
Sure.
And so something like a flower, a pre-roll, or even a vaporizer, those inhalation methods that work really fast is going to be a really great option.
Sure.
If you find that you have a little bit more of a higher tolerance, you need a little bit more of that CBD or THC, then definitely check out a vaporizer option. It's just got more of those cannabinoids, and it's also got more terpenes in there as well. I gotta give a shout out, especially since we're talking about anxiety and stress, to that 1-to-1 CBD to THC Northern Lights vaporizer that we carry. I love that. It's got so much CBD in there. It's amazing for me and for so many other patients to help them with their anxiety. So I would say that's a really great one for y'all to try if anybody's curious. We also have some CBD edibles. If you're new to edibles, Marc can tell you sometimes it's a little bit of a blind date. You don't know how strong it's going to be and how long it's going to last. And so having an edible that has some CBD in there is a really great way to sort of ease into it, especially if you've never had cannabis before.
And I know that what I use, I'm a chocoholic.
Yes.
So I love to take a little bit of chocolate just before I go to, like at about an hour or hour or two before I go to sleep. Because what it does is it takes about an hour to an hour. It takes about 30 minutes to an hour to work, maybe even 2 hours. And what I do find is it really works well. It helps me sleep because edibles last from 4 to 10 hours. I get relief throughout the night, where if I'm using a tincture drop or something like that, I wake up in the middle of the night and I've got to take more tincture drops. This helps me sleep through the night. The only complaint I have is that your chocolates taste too good. They are too tempting. And what you don't want to do is you want to take that square and you don't want to take another one, because your problem is you got to wait that 30 minutes to 2 hours to find out if it works. Don't take another. About the time you think it's not working will be the time it probably kicks in. But your chocolates are just too good.
You had me worried there for a second there.
Yeah.
But what's your favorite one so far? Do you have a favorite flavor?
I really don't. You have a dark chocolate that I really like.
Yes, the dark mint.
Yeah, and I like dark chocolates. So that's
nice.
Kind of
yeah, we have a good dark chocolate array for sure. And you've also tried our concentrates. You really like our concentrates too.
I do like your concentrates. And I'll tell you the other thing I've tried recently of yours, and I really think is basically great, is I bought a resin cartridge. One of these things
Nice.
right here. And I found it to be great. I've used resin cartridges and rosin cartridges from other dispensaries, but I really found yours is unique. I was really surprised by how good it was. And resin and
Awesome.
rosins are great because they're high in terpenes. And I'm looking for the
Yes.
terpene profiles to be able to address my particular situation, which in my case is pain. And I just find it to be very, very relaxing, and it really helps me quite a bit. Your resin pack cartridge is going to almost become my go-to pretty quick.
Yeah, and the terpenes, we're obsessed with terpenes at Insa, and so we really try to have the highest terpene content in our flower, our vaporizers, and our concentrates. And I can tell you that the people in the lab, when they're making products, they get really excited about the terpene content. That's what their real goal is. And so if they get something back with that 8, 9, 10, we've even had 12% terpene content, they get really, really excited about that.
And that's terpene rich products are really hard to find, and you guys do a good job of that.
Yeah, we just released live rosin. So
Mhm.
rosin is a type of concentrate that you would dab or vaporize, and that is incredibly high in terpene content. I think that was what the 12% terpene content testing came back for, was one of our rosins.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. The products are great. I would suggest people give it a try. I know that there's a lot of dispensaries out there, but there's a few of them that really distinguish themselves. And okay, so I'm a chocoholic. I'll say chocoholic. You distinguish yourself, but I really think not just your edibles, but your cartridges, your vape pens, concentrates are all great. And I think right now you've just been given permission here in Florida to actually now start selling your topicals and your tinctures, right?
Yes, our lotions and salves just hit the shelves, which I'm really excited about. Because, if you're one of those people that is suffering from stress and anxiety because you're dealing with chronic pain,
Mm-hmm.
especially something like, chronic arthritis,
Mm-hmm.
the topicals are going to be really great option because they're really good at reducing that inflammation and pain.
Yeah,
And so I'm super happy that they're in the Florida market because they're very popular here in Massachusetts.
great. Now, one of the things that I find interesting is everybody likes a discount. Tell us about that.
Yeah, everybody does. And we have the best rewards program in the industry. We, revamped our rewards program about a year or so ago, and we decided we were going to go for the gold and, give the best rewards. And so if you come in and you're a regular patient buying from us, you are going to see those rewards stack up over time. And eventually, you can cash them in for a nice treat. Maybe you have a pretty accessory you've been looking at that you want to buy, or you want to try a new product that
Mhm.
you've never had before. You can use your rewards and claim those. And
And
we also
rewards are
have,
stackable. In other words, you can put your senior reward together with other discounts, right?
yeah, they pretty much work just like money. So your rewards work almost just like money. So if you come in and your total after all of your everyday perks has been taken away, you can, use some more points to take your total down even more. It's a really great program, and especially because we all know that cannabis is not covered by insurance. It should
Mhm.
be, but it's not. And so we want to be able to help that budget wherever we can.
One of the other things I found is that you do have your discounts on the first, second, and third visits, but also you have a very, as you say, a very kind exchange policy. I think that's really critical. That a lot of people that when they try these products, they worry about if they buy the product and it doesn't work, what do? You're stuck. You're really not stuck if you're working with Insa. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Not only just the discounts, but also your exchange program.
Yeah, so if you are trying a new terpene profile, we'll say, to help
Mhm.
tackle your anxiety, and you find that it's just not working for you, then
Mhm.
come back, let us know. We don't want you stuck with that product, like you said. Come
Mhm.
in, exchange it, and we'll try to give you something else that will be more effective for you. And so there's a little bit less risk involved. You
Mhm.
know that if you're trying this new product, if it's not working for you, if it's not meeting the standards that you want, bring it back and we will do an exchange for you. Can't give you money back, but we'll do an exchange for a new product for you. And a lot of other dispensaries, that's not the case. It's kind
Right.
of all sales final kind of thing. And That's, one of our core values is do the right thing, and we don't think that's the right thing. So we have a really good exchange program.
There are not a lot of dispensaries that are as generous as you are with respect to exchanges, for example. In fact, most of them don't. I think, as you mentioned. So I think kudos to you. That's something
Thank
that
you.
really is a customer perk that's there. So let's talk a little bit about how do you become a patient? I know that you can apply for you can apply to the registry. You can go to MMTC, for example, of Florida. You can apply, go to see the doctors. They will actually put you into the registry if you have one of the qualifying medical conditions. And by the way, don't worry if you have or don't have those qualifying medical conditions. Here in Florida, we have a clause that allows the doctor to make the decision if you should be on medical cannabis or not, based on those medical conditions meeting certain criteria. And he can actually make that decision for you. But also, one of the things that you'll find here in Florida is that you are in a situation where every 7 months you've got to go see the physician. That's something that Rick Scott set up, and that's mainly to make sure that you are getting looked at by the doctor, and then also your recommendations. In other words, when the doctor makes a recommendation for you, he doesn't give you a prescription; he gives you a recommendation. It's good for 7 days. So you'll be getting recommendations about three times over that first 6 months to help you get through that quarter that period. But also, I think the key is also contacting a dispensary like yourself, right? Right, Lisa?
Yeah, you can contact us. If you want to talk to a person, you can reach us 1-877-500-INSA from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. every single day. If you prefer to text or chat, you can do that on our website. We have a little chat bubble. And again, you're talking with a real person from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. every single day. Or you can email us, Google message us. We have a lot of different channels out there for you to reach us and contact us if you're looking at our menu and have questions or even need assistance putting in an order. If you give us a call, we'll put the order in for you. Don't worry about it. We really just want to be here to help you with every single step of your cannabis journey.
I think that's really important. Well, Lisa, we need to move on to go answer some questions because that's really one of the keys to doing this webinar. But before I do that, I do want to mention to people that we have a site called I Got My Life Back, IGMLB. If you have a medical cannabis story, please go there and tell us. We want to be able to find out what people are using medical cannabis, what they're doing, good or bad. Okay, we are really trying to develop a site that you can tell your story, and more importantly, people can see what's going on in the medical cannabis industry from real people, and not the theory that's being pushed at us in many cases. The other thing I thought I'd mention is that Lisa and Insa do a great job with with marijuana products, but sometimes you need a hemp-based CBD product, and we put together a site called My Botanical Wellness to help you with the products that are hemp-based, not marijuana-based, that you can be able to pick up. And by the way, we should mention all of these products have been rigorously tested, like the products that are tested in the medical marijuana dispensaries. They've all been tested twice inside their operations and one in a third party that's out there. So we put this together because a lot of people, when they're starting to do their dosing, they need to have some CBD to be able to protect themselves about that high or that negative effect you could get from THC. CBD is a great way to do that, and this is a good place to get it. And by the way, the doctors have looked at these products and really have authorized what's out there. So it's a doctor-recommended product. It's not just what you get in the gas station. It's something that's really there. And by the way, if you happen to go to My Botanical Wellness, mybotanicalwellness.com, use the MMWW15 coupon, and it'll give you a 15% discount. So we've got the treatment center to be able to get your card. We got a place to get the CBD. We got a place to get the cannabis. We're addressing some of the common concerns. A lot of people actually look at this. We found out that people have asked some questions that people have asked. Can I get high? Does the cannabis cause euphoria? Why don't you kind of address some of these questions?
Yeah, and so a lot of the products that you're going to get at a dispensary will include THC in there. And so depending on your dosage level, there is the potential to have that, higher euphoria that comes with it. Mm-hmm. If that's something that you really want to avoid because it makes you really uncomfortable or just doesn't work for your lifestyle, then you are going to want to look for those high CBD products or just microdose, as we mentioned earlier. Just take really small amounts, 2.5 milligrams, 5 milligrams, and that's it, every 2 to 3 hours. In that case, you will feel more of the relaxing effects that THC can provide, but you're not going to feel, most likely, you're not going to feel overwhelmingly high at all from that low amount.
Sure. Now, one of the other questions is, will it conflict with my other medications? I think we addressed that. Please talk to your doctor and talk to your medical marijuana doctor. There's probably a good chance that it will not. But again, we're trying to be err to the safe side and really get your doctors involved. Let your medical doctor know you're using medical cannabis. I know that a lot of doctors now are actually recommending their patients use medical cannabis, although there's the doctors that are still living in the past that have a problem with it. So if that's the case, candidly, change doctors. Find somebody who's staying up to date with what's out there, because this is something that can help you. And I'm going to address the other question of, can I drive when I use medical marijuana? Just like any pharma drug that you take, on the label it says caution. You can drive with medical marijuana if you have a high tolerance of THC. And if you don't, then don't drive. You'll know if you have, if the effect that medical marijuana has. And if you have an effect that could impair your judgment, your reactions, or anything like that, I would say stay away from driving if you're taking it. I, for example, am very high tolerance of THC. I don't have a problem driving with medical marijuana, but I know some people that actually do. I think one of the other questions I'm going to throw your way, Lisa, is it's hard for me to get around. Can I get it delivered?
You can actually. We do offer delivery in Florida and in Massachusetts as well. And so, go to insa.com, put in your zip code, and you'll see if delivery is available in your area.
Mm-hmm. Which is great. One of the other questions that people have is, can I get addicted? Is it safe? I'd like to take this one because in my particular case, I have herniated discs in my neck. I can stop at any point in time. The answer is you're not going to get addicted to medical cannabis. Nobody's ever died from using medical cannabis, and nobody gets addicted from using medical cannabis. However, let me tell you what, it does happen. When I take medical cannabis, it gets rid of my pain and it gets rid of my anxiety. What's interesting is that if I take a holiday, like I take a day or two off, what ends up happening is that my pain starts coming back. And so I'm not addicted to cannabis, I'm addicted to getting rid of the pain. Let's put it that way. And the other question comes up is, do I have to smoke it?
Nope.
Great.
There's lots of different ways to use it. You can vaporize, you can use edibles, you can use topicals, tinctures. There's a lot of different options. Smoking is not the only way to go.
Yeah. Hold on, I got somebody who wants to try to reach me here. Yes. And the other question I mentioned earlier is, can you overdose from it?
No, it's actually easier to overdose on water than it is on cannabis. You can actually die from drinking too much water, but you cannot die from smoking too much cannabis. They've found that it's pretty much physically impossible.
It's really interesting. And then also, we've also heard that vaping is dangerous. We know that there was those cases in California about 4 or 5 years ago where really foreign products brought in from a foreign country that were not inspected, were not from a quality distributor. It was not from it was really kind of a street product, had the wrong e-oil in it, and were actually impairing and killing people. Here in Florida, and actually in almost every state that has a medical cannabis program, there's a very, very rigorous testing program, as we mentioned, twice inside your operation, and one outside firm has to test it before the product can be approved and be able to be distributed. So the question becomes, is vaping dangerous? And I think the answer is, if you buy it from a medical authorized medical marijuana distributor or dispensary, I think you're pretty safe to say it is not dangerous. Your thoughts on that, Lisa?
Yeah, it should be safe. This hasn't been analyzed by the FDA yet, but we don't have any additives. And that's where a lot of the problems were coming in. Is there was a lot of black market vaporizers and a lot of non-cannabis related additives. And we don't have either of those things in our dispensaries. All of our materials have to be approved. And like you said, our testing is incredibly rigorous. And so we don't have any of those additives that were causing harm. And it's very transparent as to what is inside of our vaporizers.
That's great. Legal impact. Will I get arrested if I get stopped by the police with medical marijuana products? Like alcohol, if you have an open container, it can be a problem. If you have medical marijuana products that are sealed and that are still in the packaging, the answer is they won't arrest you. Again, it's a very similar concept to having an open bottle of alcohol in your car. don't be driving down the road smoking a medical marijuana cigarette or doing something like that. Be careful with that. It's the same kind of thing. And the other question is, will someone take away my guns if I'm a Florida medical marijuana patient? And the answer is no, you will not. The same department that regulates the medical marijuana program here in Florida also puts out the permits for carrying guns. And the last director of that actually was a medical cannabis patient and did have guns. You have no problem with owning a gun and having that concealed weapons permit. Where you will have a problem is if you go and you try to buy a new gun. They will ask you a question because it's a federal form of, do you take drugs? And they ask now, do you take marijuana, medical marijuana? If you answer that question, yes, there's a good chance you probably won't be able to buy that weapon. So that's really the only negative impact that we find from this program that are there. So Lisa, why don't we, we look at some bottom line effects. Bottom line is with everybody, you are in control, right? And also you're not going to get addicted. Is that correct?
Correct. It is not physically addictive. Like you said, you may, get used to not being in pain and not feeling anxiety and stress anymore, but your body is not going to physically be harmed when you stop using cannabis.
Yeah. You're not going to get addicted. You're not going to get overdosed, but what you may end up with is the entourage effect, or 1 and 1 is 3, where you get those endocannabinoids, you get those cannabinoids, terpenes, and flavonoids all working together. So we've answered brought in a lot of information about anxiety and stress, hopefully answered questions. I think we have some more questions that the viewing audience has brought into play. Let's go take a look at answering those right now. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's my favorite part. Let's go.
Okay. So Lisa, let's answer some of those questions. I think we have a slide on a number of the questions that came in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start on them while Leah's putting the slide up. One of the questions that came up is, what is the healthiest way to consume cannabis? It's interesting that's brought up because I think that is a subject of, or it really is a question of your own particular view of health. And I say that because cannabis itself is extremely healthy. It's healthier than most other, especially a lot of pharma drugs that are out there. There is one area that I would say that is questionable, and that is when you put cannabis into your lungs, either through vaporizing, either through vaping or smoking. And there are also cannabis inhalers that are out there. Now, I do want to point out that we use inhalers outside of cannabis to help with lung conditions. And the same thing applies to cannabis-based inhalers. The medication getting into your lungs helps them quite a bit. But a lot of doctors will tell you, and I kind of agree, that anything you put into your lungs, you got to be careful with. I think I'm kind of leaning towards the healthiest ways of being things like tinctures. And also, if you're looking at using flower at all, using concentrates. Lisa, do you have any thoughts on this?
I agree with that. If you want to protect your lungs to the utmost fullest, having a non-inhalation method would be the best way to go. And if you're looking to not ingest additional calories, like in a chocolate bar or fruit drops, then something like a tincture is going to have the least additional ingredients to it.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Nicole asked a question is, so start with lower THC and going low and slow is a better option. I really believe, in fact, almost every doctor that works with medical cannabis will tell you that's the way to go. If for no other reason than to find your optimal dosing regime, or the amount of cannabis you should take to really help you. Because as you're going low and slow, you'll feel better and better. Then you begin to feel not as good, and you begin to see the bioptic effect take effect, and you can actually back off. Your thoughts on that, Lisa?
I think that, Nicole, you stated it perfectly. Start off with that lower THC amount, maybe a little bit more higher end on the CBD, especially when you're brand new to cannabis. And then just gradually, if you feel the need, increase that THC content. If you feel the need. If you're doing fine with what you start off with, then feel free to keep going with that. But just start going slow. You can always add more, but you can't take it away.
Yeah, Michael asked a couple of great questions. So let's start with the first one. I thought, by the way, thank you, Michael. We really appreciate these questions. What is the advantage of CBD combined with THC combined with CBD versus CBD only, especially since research is showing that CBD is good standalone? You're correct. CBD is very good standing alone, but when you add a little bit of THC to that CBD, what it does is it really activates. It almost puts CBD, it almost supercharges it. Your thoughts on that, Lisa? I know that we've talked about that before.
Yeah, and so I read an interesting study that looked into CBD's ability and THC's ability to reduce inflammation. And what they found was that CBD was really amazing at reducing inflammation. THC, not so much. But when you put them together, that was actually the most effective combination, was when that CBD had a little bit of THC in there. One way you can think of it is that the THC is sort of making the body absorb that CBD even more efficiently. And so you're getting all of that good stuff and you're using every little scrap of it when that THC is present with the CBD.
Yeah, I recommend using, if you're going to use a CBD product, use what they call a full spectrum product. The definition of hemp-based products is at 0.3% of THC or less, and that full spectrum product has 0.3% of THC, which is really good for you. The advantage, again, it supercharges it. What benefits you get from CBD normally, you'll find it'll be enhanced, and I think that's important to point out. Michael, I really love this question. With all the phytocannabinoids in the cannabis plant available, how many are lost when you take a gummy or smoking flower or vaping? I love this question because when I got involved in medical cannabis, I had a number of friends that said, well, I'll smoke a joint and get all the medical benefits. I don't need to do the various tinctures and things. And what I found out was that when you take that joint and you light the end of that joint with that 500-degree temperature flame, you burn off about half of the cannabinoids, all of the terpenes, and all the flavonoids. So when you take and you light a joint, you're taking about 60% of the medical efficacy away from that product or that joint that you're using. That's the bad news. Good news is it works. It still works very well. And so imagine running an engine only at 40% capacity and still having it be fairly effective. That's actually good news about how well it works. But when you instead of smoking flower, I recommend using concentrates, because what you've done, and Lisa, why don't you explain that a little bit about what you do with vaping and also what you do with gummies to be able to, the key is to be able to keep terpenes in. Now I'm going to throw this question to Lisa, and I do want to say, not all dispensaries put terpenes back into their gummies, and not all terpenes make a quality vape product that keeps the terpene profile. The key to using medical cannabis and getting the best effect is find dispensaries and products that have high or maintain their terpene profile. So all I'm trying to point out is that this is really, really important, and Insa does a great job. So tell me about what you've done with concentrates and gummies to maintain your terpene profile.
Yeah, so when it comes to concentrates, if you are looking at something like a wax, a batter, or shatter, or what I often call a dabbable, something that you would vaporize in a dab rig, a specialized pipe, then those are very high in terpenes. And basically, what a concentrate is at its core is a product that creates a concentrated amount of cannabinoids and terpenes. And so when you have a concentrate product, it's going to have a higher amount of terpenes in there than the initial flower that was used to extract it, because we're concentrating it. And so, those vaporizers, they're not only really strong in THC, but they're really strong in terpene content as well. And especially in the case of those live rosin vaporizers, you're going to get really, really high terpene content in there. And it's something we get really excited about when we see those really high numbers, as I mentioned earlier. When it comes to edibles, what you're going to want to look for is, if you're looking for something that has that terpene content in there, is you want to look for a full spectrum edible, an FSO edible, full spectrum oil. And one thing that's really exciting is that we have in the works right now, we're going to be utilizing in the near future our rosin to make edibles. And so that would be a really full spectrum edible product that has a high amount of terpenes in there. And so keep your eyes peeled for that. And so, yeah, basically that's what it is we're maintaining the essence of the plant in the final product that we're creating, but we're taking away all of the plant material that you don't necessarily need.
Right. So let's go on to the next set of questions that we have here. I know one of the questions is, and I really find interesting is how many studies that how about the studies that show that cannabis can increase the opportunity of stroke and a heart attack? And I think what you're pointing out there is a study that was actually published. I saw it in CNN, although I did get published in a lot of different places. I think it's important to point out that when you really look at the core of that study, there's a couple of things we found out about medical cannabis. It does lower your blood pressure. That's for sure. We do know that when you first smoke it, it can increase your blood pressure. In other words, especially the indicas that do that. But what's interesting overall is a lot of these studies that have been done use smokable cannabis and don't necessarily take advantage of things like the tinctures or the edibles or a lot of the patches and things like that that are in play. So the answer is, will it increase? Is the study being done? Well, you can take a study and you can actually study and have it turn out with a lot of different, how should I say, results. Oh, and I read that study and I looked at the fact that it was smokable, and they didn't really do a lot of studies. They didn't look at the alternatives like things like tinctures that are really important. I think that's something that is something that really, for me, questioned why they would put something like that out. They clearly wanted to show that cannabis was bad. And we have a lot of people in this industry that actually try to produce studies to show how cannabis is bad, where we have a bevy of information to show that really helps you. I can tell you, and I think we showed you in the CBD slide, we showed you where CBD helps with your blood pressure. It helps with your anxiety. It helps with your stress. Does it get you when you first start? Does it increase your blood pressure and your heart flow? The answer is yes, especially with an indica. Will it cause stroke? I think the article that you're referring to talked about cannabis users that used cannabis over a long period of time that they then tried to relate back to strokes and heart attacks. I think when you're a senior citizen, strokes and heart attack are part of the long-term, let's just say the benefit of being I say that with tongue in cheek because I'm a senior citizen that's out there. I'm not sure there's a direct correlation that's there. I think there's more studies that need to be done, but I won't dispute what they're saying. All I'm saying is you're not going to die from a heart attack and a stroke if you use medical cannabis. In fact, in many cases, people have used it to try the opposite effect. Lisa, have you heard anything about this?
Yeah, I read that study, and it is something to definitely keep an eye on, especially if you have a heart condition. That's something to keep an eye on. But Mark, you bring up some excellent points. Is that in that study they didn't distinguish by the type of cannabis use, and so they polled a whole lot of people who use cannabis, and then followed up with a lot of other questions as well. But they didn't separate those who smoked cannabis versus those who use edibles versus those who use topicals. And that could really make a huge difference. If you're smoking something, that'll probably have more of an opportunity to actually affect your heart and your cardiovascular system than if you're doing an edible. And so there's a lot of question marks that are still surrounding that study. And even the people who, held that study said they can't say from looking at that results, whether or not it is going to increase the opportunity of a stroke or heart attack. They can't say for sure. And so they're just basically saying it's something to keep an eye on and more studies are warranted.
Right. I'm going to take I'll take a question that's really got a quick answer to it. And that is, can I lose my job for testing THC or CBD positive? Let me first point out, a lot of people will use CBD and not THC because they're concerned about the fact that the tests, and they think if they use CBD, they won't test positive, and in fact, they will test positive. Right? That's the bad news about it. It really depends on your employer. I can't answer that question. It depends on a lot of employers. I know there are certain employers that are against it, and there's certain employers that are for it. Let me be very candid. I worked most of my career in Silicon Valley, and I can tell you if they tested for cannabis in Silicon Valley, we wouldn't have companies. You wouldn't have the Facebooks, Twitters, Hewlett Packards, Oracles, any of those companies. It's just something that they just didn't do because they realized some of their better programmers work best with, just like artists that are performers work best with work best with cannabis. It really depends on the actual employer themselves. There is no state protections for it, and I doubt very seriously if Florida would even come up with state protections for it for a whole bunch of political reasons. But I do think it really depends on your employer. The best thing to do is to ask them. And I know that especially if you have a job that is doing forklift driver or a long haul truck driver, something like that, they definitely will probably not hire you, or you probably will lose your job. Although a lot of desk jobs that are being done and a lot of programming jobs and things like that, they may or may not, they might have a more liberal policy. I think the best answer is just ask your question. Um,
Fun
Anonymous
fact,
asked a very
the
good,
only
I'm sorry,
state
go
that
ahead,
has
Lisa.
protections for your job is Maine.
Oh, really? That's
Yep,
interesting. I didn't know that. That's
there is
great.
one.
Good. Well, hopefully it'll start a trend, because I do
Yes,
think it's something where we've really got to understand that this is more of a holistic product. It's something that can help and not hurt.
yes.
Let's talk a little bit, the question about whether flower or edible. Anonymous has noticed a change in their voice. I've not run into a cause of cannabis changing a person's voice. I have seen cannabis have people become a little more bolder and speak broader, or speak louder. But have you seen anything in that area, Lisa?
I haven't. That's a new one for me. The only thing I can think of is maybe it's just helping you relax. And maybe when
Right,
you relax, you're just sort of like dipping down into those lower tones because you're feeling a little more relaxed. That might be it.
right.
But I haven't heard cannabis specifically affecting the voice box before. But now I'm going to
Right.
look into it because I'm curious.
There you go. This is one for you, Lisa. Are you opening? A friend is opening up a location in New York. How do I carry Insa products?
Well, we don't have any products that we can sell them in New York just yet because we cannot, share products across state lines, and we do not have a production facility in New York yet. But once we do, just have them email wholesale@myinsa.com, and someone will get back to you, and we'll be happy to stock your store with Insa products once we have them in your state.
Debbie asked a good question. It says, what are the most recent studies regarding the safety and efficacy of medical marijuana? I would say the best place to look, I tend to look at, is go to Normal. Normal has a great resume of studies, both recreational and medically, on cannabis that you can find. I know PubMed has a lot of research, but it's very technical. It's for doctors. I find Normal to be a great source. And your thoughts on that, Deb? Your thoughts on that, excuse me, Lisa?
Yeah, I think that's a really great one too. And oftentimes I will go to Google News and just type in cannabis. And a lot of the times the newest breaking medical studies will be in the news and you can read about them there.
Right. And I know that in my Google Chrome, I'm able to set up what they call keywords. I'm able to put in, I have right now about 45 keywords I put in. And what it does, it flags any of the studies that are out there and drop them right in my mailbox. That's
Yes,
one of
so
the other things you might want to take a
you can
look
set
at.
up some alerts for sure.
Right. I know. Susan asked a great question. Is THC alone good for sleep? Well, I'll talk about my little piece of chocolate. Lisa, you want to take that one? Because that's a great question.
Yeah, it absolutely can be. Everyone reacts differently to cannabis. And so for some people, something that has CBD or CBN along with it might be better. But there are so many people who come into our stores who buy THC products for sleep. It's actually probably the second most common reason why someone will make a purchase at our dispensaries.
Right.
They're looking for a product that'll help them with sleep. So I would say absolutely. Just don't go overboard. If you're going to try one, try like 5 to 10 milligrams your first time. That way you're not going to have, you'll most likely prevent any sort of racy thoughts as you're going to lie down. And if you're going to try an edible or vaporizer, try it about an hour before bed, I would say.
This ties into KK's question. I'm going to go to the second part of her question, which is how many chocolate squares do you take from Insa? I have a high tolerance to THC, and each of the little chocolate squares has 5 milligrams. So I actually take 2. That seems to help me. I don't recommend starting with 2. I recommend starting with, take that little chocolate square and cut it in half, and start there. Go low and go slow. If you
Yes.
are able to handle, have a high tolerance for THC, it helps quite a bit. But like I say, I take 2. But I started out with half a square. My mother, who was had a problem, actually was diagnosed with cancer, and we put her on medical cannabis to help her. I have her take a square of chocolate. We found that works more than that. Really keeps her awake at night versus putting her to sleep. And I guess KK asks, what's my favorite strain that gives you quick relief sleep? I think TD is a good job.
You broke up a little bit, but I'm going to assume you asked me what strains are popular for sleep. And I would say in Florida right now, the two that I would look at are our GMO and our Sunshine number 4. Those are very popular for sleep and very popular to unwind and relax the body at the end of the day.
Sure. Great. SM asked the question, what is CBN and how does it compare to CBD? You want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So CBN is a cannabinoid much like THC and CBD. CBN is created when THC over time breaks down and oxidizes. And basically, one thing that CBN does very, very well is put you to sleep. It's very sedative, very tiring. And I would say that that is the big difference between that and CBD. CBD is really good at relaxing the mind and, putting the body at ease, but CBN will flat out just make you feel sleepy. What does it do in a 1-to-2 combination? I would say it's going to have a lot, and I'm going to assume that's CBD to CBN, but it's going to be very sedative. It'll be very, very sleepy for you.
Great. And it says, when will you open up in Winter Haven?
I'm not sure where Winter Haven is, but if you go to insa.com and you put in your zip code, they will tell you the location that is closest to you. And I will say we are opening up a couple of locations in the near future. So if you sign up for Insa Insiders, get your emails from us, they'll let you know when we're opening up our locations, and hopefully one is going to be closest to you.
And one of the regulations here in Florida is that all products sold in Florida have to be grown in Florida.
Yes, absolutely. Yep, right. That's true for every cannabis program in every state. Every state grows their own cannabis for their own program. So all Florida cannabis is grown in Florida. All Massachusetts cannabis is grown in Massachusetts, and so on and so forth. So yeah, all Florida grown.
Great. So we had some questions that came up prior to doing this webinar from the registrants. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to take a couple of these questions, and then what I'll probably do is I'll probably then answer the rest of them via email, because I think we're getting a little bit long on the webinar itself. I don't want people to burn too much of their time, but I do want to get their questions answered.
Sure.
What terpenes should you look for in choosing anxiety? Lisa, you want to try that one?
What terpenes should you look for? I would look for caryophyllene, linalool, and myrcene are going to be really popular ones.
What should you stay away from? Do you have any idea of that?
Yeah, everyone's different. So some people are really sensitive to those more energizing terpenes that can, maybe set off your anxiety. And so something like pinene or maybe even limonene may not be the best. But, try it out, see what works for you. But if you do try something and it does make you feel a little racy, it might be because those two terpenes are too dominant.
Okay. So second set of questions is sometimes I want relief anxiety, but is it safe to drive? I think we answered that question. Do you want to take that, Lisa, and maybe give a little color to that one?
Yeah, I would say definitely listen to your body. If you are brand new to cannabis, you should not be using cannabis and hitting the road. If you've been utilizing it for a while and you know that you're feeling extremely clear-headed, then it might be a little bit on the safer side. And just a bit of advice is if you're trying a new cannabis product that's something you haven't had before, wait until you don't have anywhere you need to be. Take it on the weekend, see how you feel before you basically put it to the test in your day-to-day life. And so that would be my suggestion.
Sure. And then question is it safe to use with prescribed medications? I think we answered that during the webinar. The answer is it should be, but again, double check be on the safe side, talk to your doctor. And the other question is, can you get off any medication? I think the answer is yes. Lisa, I think you want to take that one.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of people out there who find that the side effects of their anxiety medication aren't tolerable. And so eventually they switch over to cannabis because it just integrates more, seamlessly into their life. And so if you find that you're utilizing cannabis and the anxiety medication that you've been prescribed isn't working for you, talk to your doctor about potentially switching over. Don't make any judgment calls on that before you talk to a doctor, because there may be some repercussions to just stopping your medication. But it is possible for sure.
Right. I know the next question, which is, I use a lot of concentrates, or it's rosin, probably in resin cartridges. My anxiety has been horrible lately. I'm better off with flower. I think this goes back to every person is different. And so every person gets a different reaction to it. Just again, like coffee and caffeine. I think this has to do with what's really good for you. Comments, Lisa?
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind is that your tolerance, it changes over time. As you age, a lot of people's tolerance becomes lower. And so your tolerance might be just going down a little bit, and these products might be a little too powerful for you. And so I think it might not be a bad idea to reset a little bit, take a day or two break from cannabis if you can, and then start off again with a lower THC flower with those more soothing terpenes, and then see how you feel from there.
Sure. Last question, which is the great question that we're going to take is, isn't marijuana known for causing paranoia? How can a drug that can cause paranoia help with strengthening stress and anxiety? A lot of that comes from, again, what we talked about, the dosing. If you're on the upside of that curve, it'll help you relieve that. And once you cross that barrier and start taking too much of it, it causes the paranoia. Do you want to talk about that, Lisa?
Yeah, so you want to be careful that you're not overdoing it with the THC. That can definitely potentially trigger some paranoia in people. It's not a universal symptom, though. Not everyone experiences paranoia when they try cannabis products. And so that's something to keep in mind. So just try something a little lower on the THC range, maybe something a little bit higher on the CBD if you're really looking to avoid that paranoia. And I know personally, and this is very anecdotal, once I was doing everything legally with cannabis, my paranoia went away completely. I was no longer paranoid. And so that might be part of the equation for users as well, is that there's just that little bit of nervousness from not doing things legally. And so that might no longer be a problem.
Sure. Again, it has to do with how much you take. Cannabis does, in fact, help you quite a bit with the other things that are there. Now,
Absolutely.
I do want to, I'm going to kind of stop the presentation piece of it right now. So if we can, if we go off of that, we've gone an hour and 20 minutes. And I really don't want this to go really too long. So there were some other questions, and what I'll do is I will answer them in an email form when you get the follow-up emails. I do want to point out that this is part of a medical marijuana and wellness webinar series. Next week, we're doing a webinar on sleep, the week after terpenes, and then on dosing, which are very important subjects. But I first of all thank everybody for really hanging in there for an hour and 20 minutes. It's been a lot of information, and hopefully, as I mentioned earlier, if we just help one person get their life back, it just helps you. This really is worth it. And I do want to thank each and every one of you for watching today. Lisa, do you have any final comments?
Thank you all so much for attending. If you have any questions about cannabis or Insa, feel free to reach out to our customer service department, or you can reach out to me directly at lblack@myinsa.com, and I'll be more than happy to help you. And yeah, come check us out, see what we're all about. You won't be disappointed.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for watching the webinar tonight. I want to give a special shout out and thanks to Leah and Lee, who helped in the background to put all this together. Without them, this doesn't happen. And naturally, Alyssa Katera, the person who came up with the idea of this webinar series, she deserves a great shout out for us. Please, everybody stay safe and healthy. I know over the weekend there's some weather coming into play, so pay attention to that, and hopefully use some medical cannabis for the anxiety and stress of that. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you next week for the sleep webinar. Have a good evening. Thank you.